Regenerative Ed is produced by Grounded Teaching, inspired by life and imagination and possibility for things being different. And thank you so much for listening here and for your support and for sharing the show and subscribing and coming to workshops or even joining the Patreon. Special thanks to Mallory and Emily for being new Patreons. It means so much. And before we dig in, I want to express just how stoked Jess and I are to be sharing details for this new direction that Grounded Teaching is going in just a week or two. And I guess I say new direction, but really what I should be saying is new medium. We've finally found the medium that we think fits. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you try to get your thoughts out in a journal, but you wish you had a giant canvas and a bucket of paint, and that would actually make your thoughts more concrete, right? More real, to get your thoughts on that giant canvas with a bucket of paint instead of writing words in your journal. Or maybe you have an idea for a class lesson, but that idea would maybe be actually more effective manifested as a community project instead of with your students in your classroom. You know what I mean? What I'm getting at is that we, and by we I mean Jess and I at Grounded Teaching, we are finding or developing a medium, or you could say a form or a container for our ideas. And we are super stoked on this form, and we're so excited about committing to it for the long haul. If you're working with educating kids and want to be supported in shifting the cultural, mechanical, industrialized paradigm that's present everywhere, but especially in education, because that's what we're all doing. Woohoo! That's what we're aiming for. And, we do know that this new way that we're doing things isn't going to be for everyone. And I think that that's something that we've had to learn as we're approaching teacher friends and we're sharing what we're doing. And they're like, why are you doing that? That sounds like a lot of work. Why are you doing that? And I think what we've realized is that this isn't for everybody for right now. This is for people who are radical, imaginative educators who are really thinking about changing their own practice, the system, not grinding their way through it, who see that education has a different purpose than maybe what it is right now. I might actually have Jess come on to do a twin talk about this too. So more to come on that. Woohoo! Okay, so we're getting towards the end of our series on patterns in nature, and I hope that you're enjoying it. If so, please let us know. We have some guests lined up for future podcasts. And like I said, Jess is going to come back and join me for some twin talks after we finish up the series. So I'm super stoked on that. But today we're in pattern number 6 and we're talking about lobes. Yes, lobes, L-O-B as in boy, E-S, lobes, like your earlobes. I know it sounds a little weird. I never thought of them as a natural form really before I started working with living systems. And as I designed my own food forest based on principles from regenerative agriculture and permaculture and biodynamic farming and all of that, which is basically noticing what nature does and then using our human capacities to emphasize and observe and emphasize and observe. And anyways, that's what we're talking about here today. How can we use the pattern or the form of lobes when we're designing our lives, when we're designing our learning experiences? And so we're going to dig in here today. If you want to hear more about other forms and patterns we've discussed, you can check out spirals, waves, branches, streamlines, cloud forms. We've done them all, and those are just the previous episodes in the series. So now, without further ado, on to lobes. Hey folks, welcome back. This is episode 39 today, and we're talking about lobes. You know the drill by now. Pause this and see if you can spot any lobe patterns on your body, around you somewhere. I'm sure that you're all like, yeah, I have earlobes. Okay. Are you attached or are you a detached earlobe person? Remember that was a big thing back in middle school, I think. I feel like there was some sort of meaning behind having detached or, attached earlobes. I don't know. Anyways, yes, you are right. Earlobes is one. We humans all have, these lobey parts, don't we? Internally, externally, lobes, lobes, lobes. What else? Maybe you're not still quite sure what you're looking for. I know I was a little bit stumped on this one too. I'll give you some examples to start the ball rolling for you this week. So check out a blackberry. It's a lobe itself, but if you look even closer, it's made up of tinier lobes. We'll come back to blackberries in a few minutes. But what else? What else has lobes? Tree buds, eggs, pine cones, okay? All a little bit lobey. And I hope that you take some time this week to tune into lobes a bit. Use it as a point of awareness as you're going through your day. Like, hey, For whatever reason, which we'll get into shortly, my body's got some lobes on it. Look, there's a blueberry. Lobe. This spider in my bathroom has a, behind that looks like a lobe. Check out those tree bud lobes. I mean, maybe you're not going to be verbalizing it all wonky like I just did, but acknowledging that we're shaped like other things that aren't us and that we didn't make can bring us closer to actually understanding who we are. And maybe we're all a little bit more similar to the natural world than we allow ourselves to spend time thinking about. And, if you notice some lobes this week, just give yourself 20 seconds to, crack a smile, think about how cool that is. There doesn't have to be a big ceremonial practice for noticing how patterns in natural systems can connect you to more beauty. Like, sure, there can be, and that's awesome. But our life is comprised of present moment after present moment. So if you're in the present moment and you happen to notice a tree bud this week and it's shaped a little bit like a lobe, simply give yourself 20 seconds to focus on the lobe, crack a smile, say to yourself something like, how marvelous, and then continue on with your day. Mainly, this is just a reminder for myself. Okay. So we're agreeing to take some time to be more aware of where we see lobes pop up in our world, and that is wonderful, and that is the most important part. Now, as you know, if you've been listening to this workshop in a podcast series, this is the part of the episode where we talk about why it seems this natural pattern has formed or what its function might be, and then we see what we can do about application. And in case you're new to this podcast, the reason why we're doing this is that there is an unconscious industrial system at play in our school system. You know, when you're conceptualizing this, you can think things that are black and white, not gray, things that are linear, not circular, things that are siloed, not connected. It goes on and on. Because of that, we get products out of the school system, just like we would a factory, instead of thriving humans. This really isn't that metaphorical, really. Broad brushstrokes here, folks, but that's really what it is. So intuitively, as educators, we know this. And what we talk about here is how we can find a model that is not industrial. Okay. And in this series specifically, we're trying to see how we can apply these patterns that we can observe in natural systems in order to help us redesign the what and the how that we teach. The big picture of what we're talking about here goes for the healthcare system, it goes for the agricultural system. It goes for the general mechanical, individualized, colonized, capitalized, etc. cultural stew, as I always say, that we're swimming in. And there are a million ways to say it. It's just said individualized, mechanical, colonized, capitalized, all that siloed. Because there are a million entry points into this conversation of separation. At its core, that's what it is. It's separation. So why do we focus on education in this podcast? Well, because education is, in my opinion, one of the most important key leverage points for shifting the culture away from mainly separation and extraction. And so we need new models. And it makes sense to me and to people that are a lot smarter than me that we consider the models that have been tried and tested throughout the millions of years on this planet. And let's go with those. So one of those models is thinking about patterns in living systems. One of those patterns is what we're talking about here today, lobes. All right, so we're all up to speed now on why I'm talking about lobes in a podcast that asks us to reimagine education, in case you're a newbie here. All right, so with that, what are lobes for actually? What is it that they do? I mean, you can Google it, which I definitely did to get a little bit more research. But you can also think about it. And when you take a minute to grapple with the question, you're probably going to be more likely to be invested in the answer. So feel free to pause this for a second and ask yourself, why might a blackberry be shaped like a lobe? What good does it do? And so the way that I see it is, as I've examined this pattern and use it in design, one of the most important functions from a lobe is that its curved edges provide what folks in the sciences or in permaculture call the edgeeffect. Now, this is really important to what we do at Grounded Teaching, and we actually talk about the edgeeffect quite a bit in our workshops. It's in our 2-Life framework because it is so important. And if you want a little primer on this, you can go back to one of my earliest episodes. I think it's episode 2, and it's about edges and margins, and I think it's called Those Edges Aren't That Sharp. I think that's what it's called. It's a much more comprehensive overview of what we're going to be dipping into here today. To keep it simple here, when you have an edge, that is where you have more life. So picture a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper. And let's say you take a pencil and you trace right along the edge of the paper, along all four edges, making a rectangle with your pencil, and that's pretty much almost the exact same size as the paper. If you measure that perimeter, which is your edge, it's going to be about 29 inches, right? Edge plus edge plus edge plus edge. But if you took the same piece of paper and you started in the corner and you drew a swooping line that dipped into the middle of the rectangle and then back out towards the edge and then in again and then back out and then in again, almost like you're drawing flower petals or something, would that edge be more or less than 29 inches? You can do this with your kids, math teachers. I hope that you do. Yes, obviously it's more. Okay, great. I'm going to link this back to Lobes in a second, so hang with me here. If we look at our bodies, inside our bodies or outside in the natural world, do we see squares or do we see curved squigglies? We see squigglies, right? Why does the living world organize itself this way? Because it increases the edge. Why is that good? Because increasing the perimeter has all sorts of benefits. And in the general case of edges, and not specifically just talking about lobes today, but general edges, and go back to listen to episode 2, it provides a lot of areas of diversity. So if you think of a marsh, okay, you have an edge here that has an overlap between a place that is dry and a place that is wet. You have land animals and you have water animals all in one place. Land plants, water plants, all in one place. Diversity is thriving here. Plants that are grown on the edge of a field also are usually a lot stronger than plants that grow in the middle. The challenge of being on the edge is what creates strength. It's the same reason why if you're starting tomato seeds like I am right now, you want to run your hands over the tomatoes. It makes them stronger, okay? The edge is what creates the strength. And there's so much here generally on edges. You can go back to listen to episode 2 if you want to. That challenge creates the strength. When it comes to lobes specifically, because that's what we're talking about here today, the edge effect is in play. So let's take blackberries, for example. Blackberries are one of the healthiest berries in the world, one because of their dark color, but also because of the amount of the phytonutrients in a blackberry. One of the reasons why there are so many phytonutrients in a blackberry is because the phytonutrients in a blackberry or in any berry are contained in its skin. Now, if I look at a smooth berry versus a blackberry, which berry has more skin? Well, if we think about the edge effect and all the little lobes on a blackberry, it's clear that a blackberry has more skin. And so, if you want to get more bang for your buck out of berries, choose the lobey ones like blackberries or raspberries rather than smooth ones. And I heard a doctor talk about this on a podcast way back, and it really blew my mind because at the time it fit in perfectly with what I was learning about the edge effect. It's just such a cool thing to think about. Okay, so function number 1 is that lobes increase the edge effect, which increases diversity and it increases strength. And in the case of the blackberry, which is the example that we're looking at, strength means more phytonutrients to nourish our bodies. And so I'm going to move on to our second function here in a second, and then we're going to whip back to application. But for now, does this make you think about where in your school you might need a little bit more strength or a little bit more nourishment? Is it because the pattern of your culture, or the pattern of your teaching pedagogy, or the pattern of student responses that you're seeing, or your curriculum? Is it maybe because those things are too linear and maybe not lobular enough? There, I said it. Lobular. Write it down. The second function I'm going to talk about here is sort of a sub-function of the edge effect. So what other function do curved edges create aside from providing strength and nourishment in the form of a blackberry? So this is sort of like a sub-function here. Now, in my layman brain, let's say I don't know anything about phytonutrients, I don't know anything about the edge effect, and I'm looking at a berry bush, and I'm asking myself, why is a berry shaped like a lobe? I might say to myself, I don't know, but it makes it look juicy. It makes it look more beautiful. For whatever reason, it's attractive. And I may be asking, but is beauty a function? Is that a function? Well, yeah, I think it is. Just like with spirals and other things, there is something appealing about seeing a blob on a stick, right? It's this juxtaposition maybe of the linear and the circular. I don't really know, but for whatever reason, we don't really focus on the linear in that case. It's the lobe that gets our attention. If all of us stood up and walked towards a blackberry bush and we were looking at it, and let's say the berries were even still green, the first thing that most of us would be drawn to is the berries dangling there. Now, we could call in a botanist to tell us for sure why the berries are shaped that way, but I know enough that the berry bush wants its seed to be spread by whomever eats the fruit and poos out the seed. That's how it works. So that could be one reason that it chose a lobe as its shape, because lobes are beautiful, they are attractive, and that beauty matters, which has many applications, but at any rate, it sticks out. It says, come and get me. Okay, it's attractive. So lobes make things look more beautiful, more appealing, more attractive. Notice that the living world doesn't think that beauty is necessarily frivolous. It has its perfect place. Otherwise, it would have gotten rid of it a long time ago. So the question here is, where in our schools or in the way we teach or whatnot, could we use a little attraction? Is the reason why we don't have an attraction because it's just way too, dare I say, straight? And would some design inspired by the lobe form help us out here a bit? So if you've gone through all the previous episodes so far, you're starting to probably get a little sense of how I draw the connections here. And so I'll ask, what connections does this bring up for you in the classroom? And this is why I wish that we were in a live workshop right now. It would be so cool to hear ideas, but put them on the Ground and Teaching Instagram or something like that so I can be sure I hear them. To make this concrete, I'm going to do a little bit of a rant about college, and then I'm going to do a concrete K-12 application, and then a personal application. Okay, so here I go. First off, rant about college. Let's start with a concrete example of applying the concept of attraction and the edge effect into what we're thinking about with college. Okay, so I think it was the Wall Street Journal, but this week they posted an article that said that with a great labor market, students are no longer going to college. It's just not attractive anymore, right? That was sort of the headline. The most fascinating thing that I saw in the article was a quote from someone at some ed organization, I think, who said, how do we get these people to come back, especially in a strong job market? And this person was quoted. I saw that quote and I literally laughed out loud because precisely this is the fruit of what happens. It's sort of like, of course this is happening. Like, it's not a surprise to me that kids don't want to go to college. We've taken 12 years of a child's life to prepare them for a job, and then realizing that, hey, they're actually smart, but just not in the way that we've trained them to be. We've detached them from a love of learning, which is one of the most fundamental human loves and human traits, is to love to learn. But for some reason, we've institutionalized it to a point where they don't associate institutionalized learning with actually learning about how to do things in the real world. And so they are going out and using their own brain, their own God-given beautiful brain, to figure it out without us, which leaves us thinking that they're missing something because we've held up all of these institutions for so long. But then we can question, are they? If the question is, how do we get them to come back to college, especially in a job market with that clause at the end, that clause at the end provides a clue to us as to what college is actually for. And I think that there's totally a place for, once you figure out what you want to do, becoming an expert. That needs to be in some sort of higher education. But the problem here is that kids aren't ready for that, and they don't see it like that because they're really smart, actually. And this is a new generation of people. And we've groomed them into thinking that the point of their life is making money, and that is something that has taken. So they're trying to figure it out on their own. And if they're making money without college, well, why would they need it? Okay, so we've gone pretty far down the wrong track that students don't want to participate in the institutions that are helping them learn. So if we're asking about how to make college attractive, that's the main problem that this article is posing. Let's think about the lobe pattern, because lobe patterns solve problems of attractiveness, right? We might consider that one reason college isn't attractive is because it's too linear. You pick one path and you commit to it. Otherwise, you'll fall behind. And I know that I graduated a year later because I took a little foray into architecture and art history, and I couldn't figure it out. It was too much pressure at the time for me. Of course, some students know exactly what they want, but what I'm saying is, generally, is there a way to make college feel a little bit less like a bunch of tracks that you get on and you pay a shit ton for and you can't get off of without a lot of problems? What else would help with colleges being more attractive? The edge effect. What do edges do? They create diversity. They create strength and challenge. And how can we diversify the college experience as edges breed diversity? And I'm talking about, sure, race and religion, but I'm also definitely not just talking about race and religion. How can we create more winding roads to create more edges, more connections, more strength in the college experience? And more broadly, what's going to have to change about the culture to get that college experience to be okay with not just jetting through the 4 years as fast as possible so you can make money in your career, which is the linear mindset. So that's college, right? Let's move on from here and let's think about applying LOBE patterns to school. First questions I'm going to ask. Am I experiencing any challenges with kids not being attracted to a project? Question of attraction. Am I experiencing any challenges with kids not being nourished or stronger from a project or some content? Question of strength and challenge. This might be because I'm applying an industrial, linear type of thinking where I could be applying a living systems pattern like lobular. Let's get it out there. Lobular thinking. Okay, so here's an example. Let's say each year my students need to write an essay about some topic that we've been learning about, and it feels like I am pulling teeth for at least half of the class. It all seems pretty straightforward to me. We do the learning for the unit, and then they write about what they learn, and I break it down so they brainstorm, and they create the thesis statement, and then they outline it, and then they write it, and maybe I chuck a peer review in there too, but for whatever reason, students are just totally unattracted to the assignment. They're also not getting stronger at writing. Now, when I look at this problem as a living systems educational thinker, and I hear these two symptoms, immediately I think this is a problem a lobe can solve, or at any rate, the edge effect, of which a lobe is one type of pattern that emphasizes the edge effect. How do I know that? Because we're talking about attraction and we're talking about no growth. That sounds like a symptom of an industrial, linear, mechanical system to me that a lobe might be able to solve. So how do I apply lobe thinking here? Well, where are my lines straight? Let's look at the path from an idea to a final draft. If we plotted out each step, like visually, it would look like a straight line. Ideas, or brainstorm, thesis, draft, final draft, you can put a line between all of those. And yeah, that's true. It does happen like that. But what if we want to increase the edge effect here? Well, we could introduce more feedback loops at each step so the process feels a lot less linear. So instead of a peer review just for the sake of peer reviews stuck somewhere in there because God knows that a peer review done without intention is a waste of everybody's time, instead of just throwing that in there, we do a little circle back of a review at each part. And so then do you see how if we visualize the steps, we're taking what was a straight line and we're now adding these little lobes of circles that like these curved arrows you can picture that kind of create these lobes that are feedbacks. So kids write a thesis statement, then they lobe back, they curve back to the brainstorming doc and make sure they didn't miss anything. Then they exchange it with the partner to get feedback. There's another lobe kind of coming off the top. And then that partner exchanges it again, lobe. And then it turns back to them, lobe. We just created several lobes here. And there will be stronger paragraphs that come out of that because of the edge effect and because of the diversity principle. And there will be more attraction to actually completing the essay because of the lobe effect. Because everything is a fractal of everything else. Do you see? It's pretty amazing when you start being like, oh, there are these principles that just kind of, they wind their way through every element of life. And, if you start going down this rabbit hole, you'll never stop, just like me. So warning. We can also apply the edge effect and lobular thinking, I'm going to call it lobular thinking, sure, when it comes to any classroom process or way of thinking that's not getting enough attraction or not creating enough growth. We know that curved lines will do both of those things. So see where you can visualize what's actually happening on a linear path. And with folks that I've worked with in the past, I've actually sketched this out. So, sketch out your process and then see where you can create some curved lines within that process. If it turns out that that process is really linear, that might be why it's not attractive. That might be why things aren't growing. And it's really important to note here also that if we're settled on simply finishing the essay, for example, then yeah, a straight line is going to get you there way faster. But we are not just focused on finishing. A great educator is not just focused on finishing. We are focused on loving learning. We are focused on growth. That is our job as teachers, particularly when we are teaching a curriculum, but also we could say in terms of helping our students with soft skills, as you quote unquote might call them soft skills as well, right? So no matter what kind of teacher you are, and with that in mind, yes, we're going to have to shift the culture away from finishing it to really looking at the quality, okay? That is another area of industrial mechanical systems versus linear circular ecosystems, is that, we're not just looking at quantity, we're also looking at quality. And we're saying that, hey, maybe instead of writing 5 essays this year, we're going to do 3, but they're going to end the year not hating writing, and they're going to be better writers. Notice we can still measure that. Okay, those are things that we can still measure. We aren't anti-academic here. We are pro-academics and pro all the other important stuff that the industrial system doesn't take into account. So let's just talk personally for a second, because what I love about living systems patterns is that this isn't just something that applies to school. It applies to our personal relationships. It applies to our businesses. It applies to all sorts of other industries. So let's break down a personal example. So to see if Lobes is a solution that might work in this case, remember, what I'm looking for is a problem where something is unattractive or not giving me the growth I want. And then maybe I can apply a curved edge. So let's say that I'm deciding I want to get in shape for the summer. This is totally me, by the way. Okay. I decide to do the best get in shape quick routine that I know of, which is high intensity interval training routine. And if you're not familiar, it's where you go as hard as you can for a set amount of time until you're completely out of breath, and then you rest, and then you go again. And the path there is straight. And let's say I'm about 4 weeks in and I'm feeling more energized, because before I was just, maybe sitting on my butt, but I'm also feeling a little pain in my lower back, and it's getting worse with every exercise, but I keep going because I'm on a linear track. And obviously the best trainers are going to tell you that a variety of movement is so much better, that creating some loops, if we visualize the training that includes yoga or stretching or even some strength training, is going to give you a healthier overall body. Now, while HIIT training may give you the look that you're going for, if you don't combine it with other stretches and whatnot, you're going to have gaps in your overall fitness and body health. And where we can take that linear plan that we sketched out, if we actually take the long view, right? This goes back to thinking about the essay, the qualitative, the long view. It's not just about getting to summer. It's not just about finishing the essays, right? We need to trust that looping back and spending time on curved moments is actually going to be more nourishing. And not only that, it's going to keep us going longer, right? It's more attractive. I'm going to keep wanting to go to different workouts or whatnot. It's going to keep us more attracted to the learning process and the writing process. So do we see how this applies everywhere? It applies on the macrocosm of our educational industrial system. It applies to the ways that we do a certain, pedagogical thing in our classroom, like how we teach essay writing. And it also applies to our own personal life. Okay. It also applies to your garden. Okay. If you're planting a garden, consider not doing straight rows this year. Do curved rows. Okay. That's 101. Hopefully that take on patterns of lobes and applying it to your classrooms and lives was helpful. If you want a little bit more info on it, you can head back to episode 2. I think it's called Those Edges Aren't So Sharp, to hear a little bit more. And, provide some grace. If you go back and listen to that episode, I haven't listened to it in a couple of years, but I did record it maybe 2.5 years ago. So, thank you so much for listening. If you want to be sure that you don't miss what Jess and I have planned for grounded teaching coming up here, click the link on the show notes to sign up to get the details. Up next is our 7th pattern, nuts. But we may have an interruption with a twin talk here to share a little bit more details about what we've got coming up. We'll see. Thank you so much, everyone. May you find beauty and nourishment in your curved edges this week.